They wiped out our colonies. Earth wiped them from the cosmos. Part 2. The Forge of Vengeance. In the weeks that followed the massacre, Earth changed. The planet that had known centuries of relative peace transformed itself into something new. Factories that had built consumer goods now produced weapons. Universities that had taught philosophy and art now trained engineers and soldiers. Every resource, every mind, every ounce of human effort was directed toward a single goal. The Valorians had awakened something they did not understand. They had kicked a hornet's nest and walked away, believing the hornets would simply die. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Dr. Samuel Green was a physicist who had spent his career studying theoretical propulsion systems. Before the VS attack, he had worked at a small research facility in Nevada, publishing papers that few people outside his field ever read. Now he stood at the center of the Prometheus Research Facility, a massive complex built 2 miles beneath the Rocky Mountains. 3,000 scientists worked under his command, and their mission was simple: understand the enemy's technology and make it their own. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A Valorian scout ship had crashed on Mars during the initial attack, apparently damaged by debris from a destroyed human vessel. The ship's crew had died on impact, but the technology inside remained largely intact. Green's team spent 6 months taking the vessel apart piece by piece. They analyzed every component, tested every material, and ran thousands of simulations. What they discovered changed everything. The Valorians used a form of faster-than-light travel that human scientists had theorized about for centuries but never achieved. Their drives bent the fabric of space itself, allowing their ships to cross vast distances in days rather than decades. It was technology that should have taken humanity another century to develop on its own, but humanity did not have a century. They had years at most before the Valorians decided to finish what they started. "We cannot just copy their technology," Green told his team during a late-night meeting. "We must understand it completely, and then we must make it better. When our ships meet theirs in battle, they must be faster, stronger, and more deadly. Anything less means extinction." His team worked in shifts that never stopped. Scientists collapsed from exhaustion and were carried to medical bays, only to return to their stations as soon as they could stand. They were not just working for their country or their careers. They were working for the survival of their species. Admiral Daniel Cruz oversaw the military transformation from his headquarters in Geneva. The old man had not slept more than 4 hours a night since the attack, and the weight of 4 billion deaths pressed on his shoulders every moment of every day. But he did not break. He could not afford to break. Construction began on a new class of warship, the Harbinger class. These vessels were unlike anything humanity had built before. They were designed purely for war, with thick armor, powerful weapons, and the new faster-than-light drives that Green's team had developed. Every ship was named after a colony world that had been destroyed, so that no crew would ever forget why they fought. The shipyards orbited Earth, Mars, and the Moon, working around the clock. Thousands of workers lived in orbital habitats, building the instruments of humanity's vengeance. They worked until their hands bled and their eyes burned, and then they worked some more. Captain Benjamin Cole was assigned to command the first completed Harbinger-class vessel, the Crimson Dawn. He was 47 years old, with a face that had grown hard since the attack. Before the massacre, he had been known for his easy smile and gentle nature. His wife Rebecca and their twin daughters, Amy and Claire, had lived on New Eden. They had moved there 3 years ago because Rebecca had always dreamed of raising children under alien stars. Cole had been on patrol duty when the attack came. He had listened to the distress calls from New Eden, heard his wife's voice in one of the fragmentary transmissions, and then heard nothing at all. Something inside him had died that day, but something else had been born in its place. He walked through the corridors of his new ship, running his hands along the cold metal walls. Every rivet, every weld, every circuit felt like a promise to the family he had lost. He would not fail them. He would carry their memory into battle, and he would make the Valorians pay for what they had done. Lieutenant Maria Santos served as the fleet's chief tactical officer. She was 32 years old, with dark eyes that rarely showed emotion anymore. Before the attack, she had been stationed on Prosperity Station, one of humanity's largest orbital habitats. She had been off-duty when the Valorian ships appeared, enjoying a meal with friends in the station's observation deck. The attack had come without warning. The station's shields had failed within minutes, and the evacuation order had been given too late. Maria had made it to an escape pod with seconds to spare. She had drifted in space for 11 days, surviving on emergency rations while listening to the last broadcasts of her dying station on the pod's emergency receiver. She had heard her friends die. She had heard strangers beg for mercy that never came. She had memorized every voice, every scream, every final prayer. And she had sworn that she would make the Valorians hear those same sounds. The soldiers who volunteered for the ground assault forces called themselves the Reckoning Division. Their motto was simple: we remember. They trained for 18 hours a day, pushing their bodies beyond every limit they had known. They learned to fight in every environment, from open battlefields to close-quarters combat in the corridors of enemy ships. Intelligence Officer Nathan Parker spent 4 years studying the enemy. He was a quiet man who had once been a professor of Zen archaeology. Now he led a team of analysts who gathered every piece of information they could find about the Valorian Dominion. They intercepted transmissions, analyzed wreckage, and debriefed the handful of survivors who had managed to escape the massacre. Piece by piece, they built a picture of their enemy. They mapped Valorian territory, identified their homeworld, and cataloged their fleet movements. By 2352, 5 years after the attack, humanity knew more about the Valorian Dominion than the aliens could have imagined possible. And the Valorians knew almost nothing about what humanity had become. This was exactly as Cruz had planned. He had ordered complete radio silence on all military developments. Ships were built in secret, crews were trained in isolated facilities, and no information was allowed to leave Earth's solar system. When Valorian scouts visited to check on the contained humans, they saw only civilian activity and apparent despair. They saw exactly what Cruz wanted them to see. In the 5 years since the massacre, the Valorians had sent 2 scouting missions to Earth's solar system. Both times, they had observed a species that appeared broken and diminished. They saw the shipyards, but they dismissed them as desperate defensive measures. They could not conceive that the vermin they had nearly exterminated could pose any threat to the eternal Valorian Dominion. This arrogance would be their downfall. President Walsh addressed the nation on the 5th anniversary of the attack. She stood before a crowd of 50,000 at the memorial that had been built in Geneva, and her words were broadcast to every corner of Earth. 5 years ago, we lost 4 billion of our brothers and sisters, she said. We lost children who would never grow up, parents who would never grow old, and dreams that would never be realized. The Valorian Dominion believed they had broken us. They believed that humanity would crawl into a corner and wait to die. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of a species united in purpose. They were wrong. We have not been broken. We have been forged, and now we are ready. The crowd roared, and the sound echoed across a world that had transformed itself into a weapon. 700 warships waited in the darkness beyond the moon, their crews eager for the order that would send them to the stars. The hour of reckoning had come. They wiped out our colonies. Earth wiped them from the cosmos. Part 1. The day the stars went silent. Year was 2347, and humanity had become a species of the stars. Over 200 years of expansion had carried the children of Earth to 17 different worlds scattered across the galaxy. Nearly 4 billion people now called these distant planets home. They had built cities beneath alien skies, raised families on soil that had never known human footsteps before, and created new civilizations that stretched across light years of space. Commander Lisa Morgan had served in the United Earth Fleet for 23 years. She was a tall woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and eyes that had seen more of the universe than most people could imagine. On that particular Tuesday morning, she stood on the bridge of the battleship Valor's Edge, watching the stars drift slowly past the observation windows. Her ship was stationed near the Kepler 442 system, conducting routine patrol operations that she had performed hundreds of times before. The first distress signal arrived at exactly 0847 hours. Earth Standard Time. It came from New Eden, the oldest and largest of humanity's colony worlds. The transmission was broken and filled with static, but the words that came through were clear enough to freeze the blood in Morgan's veins. This is New Eden Central Command. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. Unknown vessels have entered our system. They are firing on civilian populations. We need immediate assistance. Please, someone help us. They are killing everyone. The message cut off abruptly. Morgan immediately ordered her communications officer to establish contact with Earth Command. But before the connection could be completed, more distress signals began flooding in. Prosperity Station reported massive explosions in their orbital habitats. The agricultural world of Harvest Prime sent a single, desperate plea for evacuation. The mining colony on Titan's Gate went silent mid-transmission. One by one, the stars were going dark, 8,000 light-years away. Admiral Daniel Cruz sat in the Situation Room at Earth Command Headquarters in Geneva. He was a heavy-set man in his early 60s, with a face that had grown hard from decades of military service. He had overseen fleet operations during 3 minor conflicts with separatist factions, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for what he was seeing on the screens before him. The tactical display showed 17 green dots representing humanity's colony worlds. As he watched, they began to turn red. First one, then another, then 3 more at once. Each color change meant the same thing: total communication loss. What do we have on the attackers? Cruz demanded. His intelligence officer, a young woman named Captain Jennifer Cole, pulled up the fragmentary sensor data that had been transmitted before the colonies fell silent. The images were grainy and incomplete, but they showed something that made Cruz's stomach drop. Ships. Enormous ships. Each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. They were black as midnight, shaped like massive wedges that seemed to absorb the light around them. They moved through space with terrible grace, and where they passed, nothing survived. We're detecting at least 200 vessels, Cole reported, her voice shaking slightly. They appear to be operating in coordinated strike groups. Their weapons technology is unlike anything in our database. Cruz watched as another colony marker turned red. How fast are they moving? Sir, they've taken out 5 colonies in the last 3 hours. At this rate, they'll have eliminated all human presence outside the solar system within 72 hours. The Admiral closed his eyes for just a moment. 4 billion people. Families, children, entire generations born among the stars. All of them were dying while he sat helpless in a bunker on Earth. On Harvest Prime, a young father named Timothy Brooks grabbed his daughter and ran. The sky above their small farming community had turned orange with fire, and shapes were descending from the clouds. They were drones, hundreds of them, and they moved with mechanical precision through the streets, firing at anything that moved. Timothy had been a teacher before moving to Harvest Prime. He had brought his family here for a better life. away from the crowded cities of Earth. His wife had died 2 years ago from a local fever, and his daughter Emma was all he had left in the universe. They made it almost 200 meters before a drone spotted them. Timothy threw himself over Emma, trying to shield her with his body. The blast took them both instantly. Similar scenes played out across 17 worlds. In the underground shelters of New Eden, people huddled together and prayed to gods they had almost forgotten. On the space stations of the Outer Rim, crews fought desperately with weapons that could barely scratch the alien vessels. On every colony, the story was the same. Resistance was futile, escape was impossible, and mercy was not given. The aliens did not identify themselves. They did not demand surrender. They did not attempt communication of any kind. They simply arrived and began killing, as if they were exterminating pests rather than intelligent beings. Private recordings from the final hours of New Eden reached Earth 3 days after the colonies fell silent. A young woman had managed to hide in a maintenance shaft with a personal recording device. She had filmed everything she could see: civilians running through burning streets, children being separated from their parents, the mechanical drones hunting people through the rubble of what had once been a peaceful city. In her final recording, the young woman looked directly into the camera. Her face was covered in dust and tears. "If anyone sees this," she whispered, "tell Earth what happened here. Tell them we did not surrender. Tell them we died fighting. And tell them to make these monsters pay for what they did." The recording ended with the sound of approaching footsteps and a flash of light. President Catherine Walsh watched the recordings in the privacy of her office. She was 61 years old, a former diplomat who had spent her career building bridges between nations. She had believed, truly believed, that humanity's future lay in peaceful expansion among the stars. Now she sat alone, watching children die on worlds she would never see, and something changed inside her. The diplomat who had dedicated her life to peace felt something new taking root in her heart. It was cold, it was patient, and it demanded satisfaction. When she addressed the United Nations Assembly the following day, her voice did not shake. Tears had streaked her face moments before she walked to the podium, but her eyes were dry now, and something burned behind them that made even the most powerful leaders in the room shift uncomfortably in their seats. "We have received confirmation," she began. "All 17 of our colony worlds have been destroyed. 4 billion of our people are dead. The attackers, who we have identified through intercepted transmissions as the Valorian Dominion, have made no attempt at communication. They consider us vermin to be exterminated." She paused, letting the words sink in. "They believe we are prey. They believe we will cower on our homeworld and wait for them to come finish what they started. They believe that killing our children will break our spirit." Our hands gripped the podium. They are wrong. The vote for total war was unanimous. Every nation on Earth, regardless of past conflicts or political differences, stood united behind a single purpose. Humanity would not hide. Humanity would not forget. Humanity would have its revenge. They wiped out our colonies. Earth wiped them from the cosmos. Part 3. The Silent Armada. On the morning of March 15th, 2352, the fleet departed Earth. 700 warships slipped into faster-than-light travel, their engines burning with technology stolen from the enemy. They moved in complete radio silence, communicating only through tight beam lasers that could not be intercepted. To anyone watching from outside, they simply vanished, as if the darkness of space had swallowed them whole. Vice Admiral Lisa Morgan stood on the bridge of the Crimson Dawn, watching the stars stretch and blur as the ship accelerated beyond the speed of light. 5 years ago, she had received the first distress calls from the dying colonies. She had listened helplessly as 4 billion people screamed for help that never came. Now she led the largest military force in human history toward the heart of enemy territory. The fleet was divided into 5 battle groups, each commanded by an officer who had personal reasons to hate the Valorians. They had all lost someone in the massacre. They had all spent 5 years preparing for this moment, and they were all ready to die if it meant taking the enemy with them. Captain Benjamin Cole commanded the Crimson Dawn itself, serving directly under Morgan. His bridge crew consisted of 27 men and women who had volunteered for what many considered a suicide mission. Every one of them had a story. Every one of them had lost someone. And every one of them was ready. The journey to Valorian space would take 3 months. It was a long time to spend in the void between stars, surrounded by the cold silence of space. But the crews used the time well. Training exercises ran constantly. Gunnery crews practiced targeting drills until they could hit a moving target in their sleep. Damage control teams learned to repair critical systems while the ship shook around them. Pilots rehearsed assault patterns in simulators that recreated every possible combat scenario. Lieutenant Maria Santos spent her days refining the fleet's attack strategies. She had studied Valorian tactics for 5 years, analyzing every piece of combat data they had managed to capture. She knew how the enemy fought, how they thought, and where they were vulnerable. Their ships are individually more powerful than ours, she explained during a briefing for the command staff. One-on-one, we would lose. But they are rigid in their formations. They follow established patterns and are slow to adapt when those patterns are disrupted. We will use this against them. She pulled up a tactical display showing a typical Valorian fleet formation. They always keep their command vessels in the center, protected by rings of support ships. If we can penetrate those rings and destroy the command vessels, their coordination will collapse. Individual captains will hesitate, waiting for orders that never come. In those moments of confusion, we strike with everything we have. The officers nodded, memorizing the information. They had rehearsed these tactics 1,000 times in simulation. Soon they would test them against the real enemy. During the quiet hours between drills, the crews found their own ways to prepare. Some wrote letters to loved ones back on Earth, letters that might never be delivered if the mission failed. Others spent time in the ship's chapel, praying to whatever gods they believed in. A few simply stared out the observation windows, watching the stars drift past and thinking about what lay ahead. Cole walked through his ship every day, making a point to speak with every crew member. He learned their names, their stories, why they had volunteered for this mission. A young gunner named Peter Adams had lost his entire family on Harvest Prime. A medical officer named Sarah Mitchell had watched her husband die in a transmission from New Eden. An engineer named James Crawford had been born on Prosperity Station and had escaped only because he was visiting Earth when the attack came. Every person on the ship carried grief like a weight on their shoulders. But they also carried something else, a burning determination that would not be extinguished until the Valorians paid for what they had done. Nathan Parker, the intelligence officer, continued his work even during the journey. His team analyzed the latest data on Valorian fleet positions, updating their maps and refining their target lists. The information was weeks old by the time it reached them, transmitted through secret relay stations that human agents had planted in deep space. But it was enough to confirm their primary targets. The main Valorian fleet is concentrated around their homeworld, Parker reported. They have approximately 500 capital ships and thousands of smaller vessels. Our intelligence suggests they have no idea we are coming. Their patrols in our direction have actually decreased over the past year. They believe we are a broken species, no longer worth watching. Morgan smiled grimly. Then we will have the advantage of surprise. By the time they realize what is happening, their outer defenses will already be burning. The first contact came 2 days before. They reached Valorian territory. A patrol of 12 enemy vessels detected the fleet. As it dropped out of faster-than-light travel to recalibrate navigation systems, the Valorian ships immediately began accelerating toward the human formation, their weapons charging. Morgan did not hesitate. All ships engage at will. No survivors. No distress signals. We cannot let them warn the homeworld. The battle was brief and brutal. Human ships swarmed the Valorian patrol, hitting them from multiple angles simultaneously. The enemy vessels were larger and more heavily armed, but they were outnumbered and caught off guard. They had expected to find merchants or scouts, not the combined firepower of 700 warships. The first Valorian vessel exploded 4 minutes into the engagement, its reactor breaching under concentrated fire from 8 human destroyers. The second followed 30 seconds later. By the time the enemy commander realized how badly outmatched he was, half his ships were already debris. The engagement lasted 7 minutes in total. 12 Valorian ships were destroyed. 2 human vessels were lost, their crews sacrificing themselves to ensure no enemy transmissions escaped. When it was over, Morgan stood in silence, looking at the debris field on the tactical display. 400 human sailors had died in those 7 minutes. It was the first blood payment of many that would be made before this war was over. But the secrecy of the mission remained intact. No warning would reach the Valorian homeworld. The enemy still did not know that death was coming for them. Cole walked onto the bridge and stood beside Morgan. He looked at the debris field, then at the coordinates that marked their destination. 2 more days, he said quietly. Morgan nodded. 2 more days. And then they learn what happens when you murder 4 billion people and expect no consequences. She gave the order to resume faster-than-light travel. The fleet vanished once more into the void, a silent armada carrying the fury of an entire species. Behind them, the wreckage of the Valorian patrol drifted in the cold emptiness of space. It was the first of many such debris fields that would mark humanity's path to vengeance. The Valorians had believed themselves invincible. They had ruled their corner of the galaxy for thousands of years, crushing any species that showed signs of becoming a threat. They had perfected the art of genocide, wiping out entire civilizations before they could develop the technology to fight back. But they had never faced an enemy like humanity. They had never faced a species that could turn grief into fuel and rage into focus. They had never faced a species that would sacrifice everything, endure anything, to avenge its fallen children. They were about to learn. They wiped out our colonies. Earth wiped them from the cosmos. Part 4. The burning of worlds. The campaign lasted 8 months. And it was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human forces struck Valorian territory like a storm of fire and steel. They hit military installations without warning, eliminated defense platforms before they could power up, and vanished into faster-than-light travel before reinforcements could arrive. The enemy scrambled to respond, but their command structure could not adapt to an enemy that refused to follow the rules of war they had known for millennia. Admiral Morgan directed the campaign from the bridge of the Crimson Dawn, coordinating attacks across dozens of star systems simultaneously. Her tactical officers worked in shifts, tracking enemy movements and identifying weaknesses in their defenses. Every engagement was planned with precision, every target selected for maximum impact. Nathan Parker's intelligence work proved invaluable. He had identified the key nodes in Valorian infrastructure, the supply depots and communication relays that kept their military functioning. Human ships targeted these installations first, cutting the lines that connected the enemy fleet to its commanders. Within the first month, 17 major Valorian military bases had been destroyed. Supply lines that had operated smoothly for centuries suddenly went silent. Communication networks that had linked the Empire together began to fail. The Valorian High Command issued orders that never reached their intended recipients, and received reports from fleets that no longer existed. Captain Cole led the assault on a Valorian shipyard orbiting a gas giant in the Kairos system. The facility was one of the largest in enemy territory, capable of producing 3 capital ships per month. It was defended by 50 warships and a network of orbital weapons platforms. The attack began at 040 hours, local time. Cole's battle group dropped out of faster-than-light travel at close range, catching the defenders by surprise. The first volley destroyed 4 enemy vessels before they could raise their shields. The second volley took out the nearest weapons platforms. "Press the attack," Cole ordered. "Do not give them time to organize." The battle raged for 3 hours. Human ships weaved through enemy formations, their smaller size and superior maneuverability allowing them to avoid the heavy weapons that the Valorians relied upon. When a human vessel was damaged, it did not retreat. It accelerated toward the nearest enemy ship, firing until its weapons went silent. By the time the shipyard fell, Cole's battle group had lost 8 vessels. But the enemy had lost 53, along with their ability to produce new warships in this sector. It was a trade that Cole would make every time. Lieutenant Santos refined her tactics with each engagement. She noticed patterns in Valorian behavior, weaknesses that could be exploited. Their ships always turned the same direction when evading. Their captains always waited for orders before taking independent action. Their gunners always prioritized larger targets, ignoring the smaller vessels that could slip through their defenses. She shared these observations with every captain in the fleet, and the human advantage grew with each battle. Ships that should have been destroyed broke through enemy lines. Attacks that should have failed succeeded. The Valorians were facing an enemy that learned from every encounter and adapted faster than they could respond. The Battle of the Obsidian Nebula became the turning point of the war. The Valorian High Command had finally gathered enough forces to make a stand. 300 warships, the largest concentration of enemy vessels since the beginning of the campaign, waited in the swirling clouds of the nebula. Their commanders believed that the confined space would neutralize human mobility advantages and allow their superior firepower to overwhelm the attackers. They were wrong. Morgan brought 500 ships to the battle. She had spent weeks positioning her forces, moving them through uncharted space routes that Parker's team had discovered. When the attack came, it came from 3 directions simultaneously. The battle lasted 6 hours. Human vessels poured fire into the Valorian formation, breaking it apart piece by piece. The enemy commanders tried to reform their lines, but every time they established a new defensive position, human ships appeared on their flanks. Santos coordinated the assault from the Crimson Dawn's tactical center, directing fire across the entire battlefield. She could see the enemy formation on her displays, watch it crumble under the relentless pressure. She thought of Prosperity Station, of the friends she had lost, of the screams she had heard during those 11 days in the escape pod. This was for them. This was for all of them. When the battle ended, the Valorian Grand Fleet had ceased to exist. 287 enemy vessels had been destroyed. Only scattered survivors managed to escape into faster-than-light travel, and they brought with them tales of an enemy that could not be stopped. The path to the Valorian homeworld was now open. Cole's battle group led the assault on Valoria Prime's orbital defenses. The enemy had concentrated everything they had left around their homeworld. A desperate final stand that included civilian vessels pressed into military service. They fought with the courage of beings who knew they were defending their homes, their families, their very existence. But courage was not enough. Not against an enemy that had spent 5 years preparing for this moment. The Crimson Dawn took heavy damage during the assault. A direct hit from a planetary defense cannon killed 93 crew members and disabled half the ship's weapons. Cole ordered the survivors to seal the damaged sections and continue fighting. "We did not come this far to stop now," he said. "Keep firing." The ship held together through sheer determination and the skill of its crew. When the planetary shields finally fell, the Crimson Dawn was still in the fight, still pouring fire into the enemy. Cole opened the communication channel to the Valorian leadership. His face appeared on screens across the planet, transmitted through their own networks. "You came to our colonies with fire and death," he said. "You gave our people no warning, no chance to surrender, no mercy. You killed our children in their beds and called it pest control. You believed that would break us." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was cold. "We did not come here to negotiate. We came here to ensure you never threaten anyone again." The bombardment of Valorian military and industrial centers continued for 3 days. Cities that produced warships became craters. Facilities that built weapons became ash. Orbital stations that had launched attacks on human colonies were reduced to debris. Human ground forces, led by General Patricia Hayes, landed on the planet's surface to occupy key positions. They moved through the ruins of military installations, securing technology and capturing prisoners who might provide useful intelligence. What they found in the Valorian archives changed everything. The records showed that humanity had not been the first species to face Valorian aggression. Over their long history, the Valorians had exterminated 17 other civilizations. They had developed genocide into an art form, attacking young species before they could develop the technology to resist. Some of the extinct civilizations had been peaceful, content to remain on their homeworlds. Others had been explorers like humanity, spreading across the stars. All of them had been destroyed with the same cold efficiency. Humanity had not been special. They had simply been next on the list. Hayes transmitted the records back to Earth. And when the people of the homeworld saw what the Valorians had done, not just to humanity, but to countless others, the last traces of mercy faded from their hearts. The Valorian Dominion would pay for all of its crimes. For every species it had destroyed, for every child it had murdered, for every dream it had ended. The reckoning had only just begun. They wiped out our colonies. Earth wiped them from the cosmos. Part 5. The new order of the Valorian Dominion fell in 2353, 8 months after the human fleet had departed Earth. Their military was destroyed, scattered across 100 battlefields where the debris of their warships still drifted in cold silence. Their empire, which had endured for 3,000 years, was shattered beyond repair. Their homeworld, from which they had launched campaigns of extermination against species across the galaxy, was now occupied by the very creatures they had dismissed as vermin. Admiral Lisa Morgan stood in the great council chamber of Valoria Prime, surrounded by the captured members of the Valorian High Council. They were tall beings, gray-skinned and slender, with large eyes that had once looked upon the galaxy with contempt. Now those eyes held only fear and disbelief. Morgan had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times during the long journey to their stars. She had imagined what she would say, how she would feel when she finally stood before the beings who had murdered 4 billion of her people. She had expected to feel satisfaction, or perhaps rage. Instead, she felt tired. The weight of the campaign, of the deaths she had ordered and the losses she had endured, pressed down on her shoulders. But there was still work to be done. "You will disarm permanently," she announced, her voice echoing through the ancient chamber. "Your military vessels will be destroyed. Your weapons factories will be dismantled. You will never again possess the ability to wage war against any species." The Valorians listened in silence. Some of them trembled. Others simply stared, unable to comprehend how their eternal dominion had fallen so quickly. You will submit to human oversight. Our representatives will remain on your world indefinitely. Every aspect of your government will be monitored. Any attempt to rebuild your military capacity will be met with immediate and overwhelming force. Morgan paused, looking at each council member in turn. You will pay reparations to the families of every person you murdered. Every colony you destroyed will be rebuilt. Every name will be remembered. And you will live with the knowledge that the species you dismissed as vermin brought your eternal dominion to its knees. One of the council members, an elderly Valorian who had been the architect of the attack on human colonies, spoke for the first time. His voice was weak, broken. What you ask is impossible. Our people will starve. Our civilization will collapse. Morgan's expression did not change. That is not our concern. You showed no mercy to the children of New Eden. You showed no mercy to the families of Harvest Prime. You showed no mercy to 4 billion human beings who had done nothing to threaten you. Why should we show mercy to you? The council chamber fell silent. Back on Earth, the debates raged for weeks. Some argued for complete extermination. The grief was still too fresh, the wounds too deep. Why should the Valorians be allowed to survive when they had tried to wipe humanity from existence? President Catherine Walsh listened to every argument, then made her final decision. We are not them, she said in an address to the United Nations Assembly. We did not fight this war to become the monsters we defeated. The Valorians will be held accountable for their crimes. They will be disarmed, monitored, and forced to make amends. But we will not commit genocide. We will not murder their children to punish the sins of their leaders. We will be better than them. She paused, and her eyes hardened. But they will never forget what happens when you mistake human kindness for weakness. The occupation of Valoria Prime continued for 50 years. Human ships patrolled their space. Human inspectors visited their factories, and human representatives sat in their councils. The Valorians learned to live under the watchful eyes of the species they had tried to exterminate. Captain Benjamin Cole retired from active service after the war. He returned to Earth and spent his remaining years establishing memorials to the fallen colonies. 17 monuments were built in Geneva, one for each world that had been destroyed. Every year, on the anniversary of the massacre, billions of humans observed a moment of silence in their memory. Cole often visited the memorial for New Eden. He would stand before the wall where his wife's name was inscribed, where his daughters' names were carved into the stone, and he would remember the family he had lost. The rage that had driven him through the war had faded, replaced by a quiet sorrow that would never completely heal. But there was peace now, because of what he and others like him had done. There was hope for future generations who would never have to know the fear of alien ships descending on their worlds. Lieutenant Maria Santos became the first human ambassador to the newly formed Galactic Council. The body had been created by the dozen species the Valorians had terrorized over centuries. Some of them had been victims of failed genocide attempts. Others had lived in hiding for generations, afraid to reveal themselves to the galaxy. Now they emerged from the shadows, drawn by the impossible news that the Valorian dominion had fallen. They came to meet the species that had accomplished what none of them had believed possible. At the first session of the Galactic Council, a diplomat from a species called the Ethrani approached Santos. His people had been hunted by the Valorians for 300 years, surviving only by constantly moving and hiding. I must ask you something, he said. My people have studied humanity since your victory. We have tried to understand how you accomplished what you did. But one thing remains a mystery to us. Santos nodded, waiting. What kind of species, the Ethrani asked, can suffer such terrible loss and respond with such overwhelming force? How do you endure such pain and transform it into such power? Santis thought about the question for a long time. She thought about the 11 days in the escape pod, listening to her friends die. She thought about the years of preparation, the battle she had helped plan, the enemies she had helped destroy. She thought about the 4 billion names that were now carved in stone on Earth. A species that remembers, she said finally. A species that protects its own. A species that will burn the galaxy to ash before we let our children die unavenged. The Ethrani diplomat nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Then we are fortunate you are not our enemy. Yes, Santis replied. You are. The colonies were rebuilt. New generations were born among distant stars, on worlds that their grandparents had never seen. The 17 names of the destroyed colonies became sacred in human culture, spoken with reverence in schools and ceremonies across the galaxy and throughout the known universe. A simple truth spread from world to world. Species who had never met a human heard the stories and understood the lesson they contained. Humanity was not to be trifled with. The Valorians had wanted to wipe out a species they considered beneath them. They had looked at human colonies and seen pests to be exterminated, not people with families and dreams and the right to exist. They had believed that killing 4 billion humans would break the survivors, would teach them to cower and hide and wait for extinction. Instead, they had awakened something they could not comprehend. They had faced a civilization that would endure any hardship, overcome any obstacle, and never, ever forget. 200 years after the war, the last restrictions on the Valorians were finally lifted. Their descendants, who had grown up under human oversight, were allowed to govern themselves once more. Many of them had come to understand why their ancestors had been punished, had come to feel genuine remorse for crimes committed generations before their birth, but they never forgot the lesson their species had learned at such terrible cost, and neither did the rest of the galaxy. The stars belonged to those who were brave enough to claim them. Humanity had proven it was brave enough to claim them all, and anyone who threatened the children of Earth would learn, as the Valorians had learned, that there was no corner of the universe dark enough to hide from human vengeance. This was the legacy of the massacre and the war that followed. This was the price the Valorians had paid, and the price any future aggressor would pay. Humanity remembered. Humanity endured. Humanity would never forget, and the galaxy was better for it.